Hello, everyone out there. Welcome to this Montana Book Festival event. I'm just kind of watching people stream in for a second. My introduction is pretty long, so I'm going to go ahead and begin. And hopefully by the end of it, our audience will be in and settled into this space. So again, welcome to this Montana Book Festival event. This particular event is featuring debut memoirists Annie Connole, Catherine Raven, and Keema Waterfield. This is Debut Truths. This event is sponsored by a number of different organizations and businesses here, including Arts Missoula, MissoulaEvents.net, the Whitefish Review, Humanities Montana, the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, and Noteworthy Paper and Press. My name is Lauren Korn. I'm the director of the Montana Book Festival. I am zooming in today from my office in the Mountain Press Publishing Company building here in beautiful Missoula, Montana. The Montana Book Festival acknowledges that we are in the Aboriginal territories of the Salish and Kalispel peoples. The name Missoula comes from the Bitterroot Salish word in Mijuzlatko, which means place of freezing water. This name has been used for over 12,000 years since the existence of Glacial Lake Missoula. The first Europeans who came here borrowed the Salish term in Mijuzlatko and modified the word to Missoula. Later, when Glacial Lake Missoula melted, the Bitterroot Salish began using an additional term for Missoula, which means place of the small bull trout. In 1855, the Bitterroot Salish were forced to sign the Hellgate Treaty. And following this treaty, the United States government carried out forced assimilation, removal, and genocide against the Salish and other peoples in their efforts to acquire land. Yet despite centuries of colonial theft and oppression, the Tutyakan people are still here and thriving on their Aboriginal lands. The Montana Book Festival strives, and we will continue to strive to help promote Indigenous voices as one of the ways that our organization acknowledges and respects the Aboriginal peoples of Missoula. For those of you zooming in from outside of Missoula, I encourage you to let us know where you're zooming in from in the chat. There should be a link there that can help you identify which territories you're currently occupying. And if you'd like, please throw those locations into the chat so that we can see who all is here today. I have a little bit of housekeeping before we begin the conversation and reading this afternoon. I'd like to invite you as attendees to submit your questions via the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Those questions will be relegated to the last 10 or 15 minutes of the conversation. Feel free to use the chat function, which is separate from the Q&A, to talk amongst yourselves in the Q&A. Sarah Capdeville, who's one of our wonderful Montana Book Festival volunteers, she'll be throwing out some links to books where you can buy them online. And we'll be monitoring both the Q&A and the chat functions for any logistical questions you might have throughout the conversation and reading. I also want to note here at the top that if you're interested in purchasing copies of the memoirs that we're going to be centering and featuring this afternoon, please go to factandfictionbooks.com or Fact and Fiction Books here in Missoula, Montana. You can purchase them there, and please use the MBF code at checkout. This ensures that 20% of those sales comes back to the festival so that we can continue programming throughout the year. So with that, I would love to introduce our three memoirists today. The first, Keema Waterfield, was born in a trailer in Anchorage, Alaska. The year John Lennon was shot, smallpox was officially eradicated, and the first Iran-Iraq war began. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, Wired, Brevity, Redivider, and Pithead Chapel, and has been selected as a Best American Essay Notable. She received her M.F.A. in creative nonfiction from the University of Montana, and she now resides in Missoula, Montana with her husband, 2 children, a bunch of extra instruments she doesn't know how to play, and a revolving cast of quirky animals. Follow her on Twitter and Instagram at Keemasaurus Rex. Welcome, Keema. Annie Connole is a writer and artist based in the Mojave Desert. Born and raised in the rocky highlands of Helena, Montana, Annie holds an M.F.A. from UC Riverside Palm Desert. In 2021, her first book, The Spring, a mythic memoir, was published by Chin Music Press, and Connole was heralded by the High Desert Journal as a new and compelling voice arising out of the American West. Today, Annie joins us from Joshua Tree, California. Hi, Annie. And our third memoirist is Catherine Raven, who graduated from the University of Montana with degrees in zoology and botany and the President's Award for Top Student in Natural Sciences. She moved from Missoula to Bozeman for her Ph.D. in biology from Montana State. Her story about an odd and transformative relationship with her first real friend, a wild fox, was published in 2021 and has been named a Best Book of the Year by Barnes & Noble. A New York Times bestseller, Fox and I, An Uncommon Friendship was listed as one of the summer's best books by People and Time magazines. And in 2017, Catherine won the Montana Book Festival Award for Emerging Nonfiction Writers. We're so happy to have Catherine back. The winning essay became the first chapter in Fox and I. Her natural history essays have been published in Journal of American Mensa, American Scientist, National Geographic Traveler, and Narrative. She continues to live without people as she has all her adult life. Welcome, Catherine. All right, so for our audience members this afternoon, there's going to be individual readings happening right now. So Keema, Annie, and then Catherine are going to read from their memoirs. And then I'll have a couple questions for them, and then we can open it up. The conversation can expand from there. So I'm going to change this to speaker view. And I think, Keema, you're up first.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I appreciate that. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I live and write on Salish and Kalispel land, and express my gratitude to the Montana Book Festival for hosting this event alongside so many other stellar events. Thank you for having us. Inside Passage is a coming of age story set on the coast of Southeast and South Central Alaska, where I began performing at folk festivals from a very young age alongside my sister and my wild young hippie mother. There's a lot of music and love and intergenerational trauma, a lot of ferries and cars and tents, a lot of hardship, but some light reflecting into that wilderness. I'm going to read to you from a chapter midway through called Boy Wonder and the Water Fields. Krukuk, the raven outside our tent said. I sighed, blinking up at the fog of my family's breath beating on the tent wall. I snuggled deeper into the nest of sweaters and blankets we shared, but I knew I would not sleep again. That bag of feathers had been cawing for an hour already, tempting me with his curious throaty call, a high-pitched birdish purr followed by a guttural stop, like a pebble dropped into still water. Krukuk. I don't speak raven, of course, but my throat still tightened in response. I liked to imagine I knew that bird from last year, but Southeast Alaska has more ravens than cars. I doubted our history. I pounded the wool sweater I'd been using as a pillow and stuffed it back under my neck, fighting off restlessness. Mom slept on her back alongside the wall opposite me, one arm thrown up so that her wrist lay across her forehead like a portrait of Victorian frailty. I watched the muscles in her neck move in anticipation of wakefulness and the small throat-clearing cough she does. I imagined climbing over Camden and Tekla to nestle my head in the crook of my mother's arm like a 5-year-old. I wanted to press my face to her sandalwood-scented hair, kiss her awake, tell her that I loved her. But I let her sleep because at 10, I was well-versed in the landscape of her night, boozy laughter rising from the flames of one campfire after another, the high whine of fiddle and the low thump of cello overlaid by guitars and mandolins and spontaneous harmonies, clouds of pot smoke drifting toward an invisible moon in the perpetual twilight of an Alaskan summer. The low zerbert of the rainfly's zipper and her silhouette against the bug net when she woke me to turn off the flashlights we'd read ourselves to sleep by. I tucked night-chilled ears under the blanket and listened to my brother's boys' snores, the wind in the trees, a faraway cough in another tent. I tried to guess how many times I'd woken at the edge of a festival in this family tent. 50? 500? But memory is slippery for a festival rat like me. I'd been spinning the fixed wheel of my mother's musical adventures my entire life. The backdrop changed often, but the tempo, the songs, and sometimes even the people were nearly always the same wherever we went. It left me with a loose grip on time and made year markers unreliable. Home might be Juneau, Ketchikan, Sitka, Petersburg, or Fairbanks during the school year. Summers could be any combination thereof, depending which festivals or family members had the greatest pull. Who can even remember which festival had started it all, or count the number of summer days we slept in our own beds after that? How many black-eyed ravens had jerked me awake too early, leaving me exhausted from a long night of music and campfire, thrilled that another would follow? I don't remember, and maybe it doesn't matter. Soon, hundreds of festival goers outside our tent were going to blink their sleepy collective eyes unfurl shivering bodies from their own multicolored tents, and sleepwalk towards the coffee stand or the outhouses, depending. The raven's call would become background noise after the first early morning mic check from the main stage, always performed by a heavy smoker with a hangover in his throat. You'd hear mic check 1, 2, followed by a gagging cough and the thump of a palm on the mic to mute the spitting sound. This is what I imagined heaven felt like. Mom, Tekla, Camden, and me in our sun-dappled tent with another day of music warming up outside. No stepdads or visitation schedules, just us, right where we were meant to be. I preferred pivoting around my mother's distant moon out on the road anyway. Back in our real lives, we had school and work and some variation of boyfriends and stepdads to contend with. But out here, when we had her to ourselves, it felt as if someone had hung lights from the sky just for us kids. And they spelled out, "This is where you belong." "Krukuk," the raven croaked outside our tent. I wanted to unzip the front flap, whisper soft, slip into my boot, and find that bird. There were questions he could answer better than a magic 8-ball. It's a game I've played all my life. Krukuk with a rising cook means yes. Krukuk with a declining cook means no. Will it ever be just us again? I could ask him. Forever? It seems impossible that we hadn't heard of the Haines Festival before we moved to Fairbanks. We enjoyed it so much that first year it became our unofficial home base. That's why it hit me out of the blue when Mom said we wouldn't be going to Haines the summer I turned 13. It's too expensive, she said. Ferry tickets, admission, food, we just can't do it. I didn't know she was worried about saving for an undecided future. I moped around for a week. Mom came alive in Haines. Stress evaporated from the lines of her face the moment we unpacked the tent. She came back to us there more than anywhere else. She taught us guitar chords around the campfire, introduced us proudly to the musicians she met, and dragged us onto the sawdust-covered dance floor every night. Nothing felt more natural than when she invited Tekla and me up on the stage during performances to sing our hearts out beside her. After Haines, there was a window of time before we lost her to the adult world. Our jokes were still funny, our pranks amusing, our enthusiasm shared. "We have to go to Haines," I said. "We have to." She insisted we'd find something else to do. I wanted to say, "We need this. Don't you understand? All of us." I could call 100 places home and never sleep under the same roof for more than half a year. I could watch my mother work 3 or 4 part-time jobs while taking night classes, even help out with the cooking and cleaning and make sure the siblings got their homework and chores done. But I couldn't live forever with my mother always on the other side of the moon and only a tin can telephone between us. Haines was our way back to each other. Later that day, I'd walked the rocky beach in front of our house on North Douglas Island, across the channel from Juneau. I stalked the tide pools, admiring the starfish, anemones, and tiny crabs brave enough to wade out low tide in a murky mud puddle when all around were large, eager birds desperate for a tasty snack. 2 ravens called back and forth from their perches in the tree line. "Is it even worth hoping?" I asked them on my way home. One bird opened its beak and worked its tongue in a kind of laughing pant, while the other chewed the underside of a wing. Silence. "Crook-cook," I called finally out of frustration. Yes. The bird nearest me took flight, disgusted. The other one did an about-face hop and ruffled its feathers. "Crook-cook," it said. It's not hard to trick the tricksters. Thanks, I'm going to bring in Annie.
Thank you, Keema. I've loved reading your book this last couple weeks. It's been a real pleasure. Hello, everybody. I want to acknowledge that I've been writing and reading on Kauai and Serrano land. And I also have great gratitude to the Montana Book Festival for inviting me to speak and for all of the wonderful programming around books. So I'll be reading from the wolf passages of my book, The Spring, a Mythic Memoir. And my book, in addition to having much prose, obviously, also has color photographs of many of the animals in the book. So this is the wolf photograph. You can't see the wolf very well, but just wanted to put it up there since it is part of the narrative. Wolf. I go north for a winter visit to Yellowstone to hear the lullaby of the Lamar Valley under a blanket of snow. Yellowstone is where rivers begin and alight, a primordial landscape, a hunting ground for many. Near dusk, wolf, you begin a winter hunt. As my car rolls up beside you, I fumble to grab my camera, but you look away, resisting my lens. Carefully, you make your way through elk and buffalo tracks. Determined, I lean in through my window and make a picture of your flawless silhouette against a blank canvas of white snow, tail pointing east, eyes gazing west. From this stillness, you leap into your hunt. Jumping through hoof prints, you track a scent for minutes that feel like hours. I get out of the car so I can watch you dance along the trail. At one point, you pick up a mouse and carry it briefly before dropping it. Was it rotten? Perhaps frozen. You go on making time, leaping and bounding, keeping your nose close to the ground. In this small window of time, you have covered a vast swath of land. Wolf, despised and outlawed, you are the finest hunter of the forest. Deftly tracking, I watch you pause, leap, pounce, and dive into a field of white. Come up empty. Scents hide, scatter, confuse. They disperse, then return with ferocity, moving straight to the gut, the head, the heart, the hands all over, shake me up, feel like stars in my veins, bang around till it feels like I might pop. Wolf, have you ever carved a heart out? I move through new and old tracks of Yellowstone, many happy returns. But on this trip, I am alone, hunting ghosts, hunting things I cannot name, hunting elusive silhouettes with a steady knock on the inside of my heart, drumming a low beat. The scent becomes muddy. A heavy heart threatens to slow me down, the weight of love's memory. The heart could rupture, give me away. I think of ley lines, telluric pathways, magnetic energy currents flowing around the earth. They can become routes, highways of information that lead us through invisible trails of the universe. I hear they can help us arrive at our uncharted destinations. Wolf, I watch you stab at something, both paws suspended, diving down with exposed teeth. But just as your nose brushes over fur, your prey disappears. Ley lines, a string of lights surrounding the earth. Some say this is how geese return to the same spring every year. Can you feel it, Wolf? That strong pull? Or is it a push? That night I go to the pool bar at the old Hot Springs Hotel, have a beer and try to talk to some guys sitting next to me. The scent isn't there, but I want it to be, so I stay a while and hope the music will get better, that it will become real jukebox music, the kind that makes you want to sway and lean into the one next to you for a kiss. But this is one of the new digital jukeboxes, the kind that display their wares on a blinking neon screen. I want the kind of jukebox where you can hear the clicking of the album jackets flipping from side to side, turning the browning edges of playlists over and over to your delight. I want the kind of jukebox that will help me remember that thing that left my heart. Remember the scent I'm supposed to be following. So I go out to the pool and swim in the deep end beneath the winking moon and stars, no longer believing they will guide me, but still intimidated by their potency. The painter was taken on a full moon night. What else can they do? By tracking the tail of desire, listening to ley lines, I resist a fate divined by stars. Where are you, Wolf? Did you catch it? They often call you lone wolf, but really, you are alone only while hunting. When night comes, you circle up with your pack. And yet, sometimes, even when you're with them, rolling around, playing, caressing, jostling, sparring, you are still alone in your heart. Thank you. And now for Catherine.
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. And thank you, Montana Book Festival for, I'm not really been a writer, so, or studied it. So I thank you for the chance to get to meet Keema and Annie. That's been a really big thrill for me. This section that I'm going to read to you, I chose because it takes place in October on a full moon, which is what we're coming to. If you Twitter me, you can, I just learned how to use that, but I'm okay with it. If you Twitter me, you can see full moon pictures that I'll send when we have nights and full moons, and we will tonight, and I'd love to see your full moons too. Besides choosing a section about a full moon in October, a lot of the themes of the book show up in the section that I'm reading, and one of them happens right around the sentences what I'm reading about the moon. The book is also about the relationship between humans and non-human animals, and how closely we are related to non-human animals, how closely they're related to us. Those are two different things, and I think that human culture, which has been developing for 200,000 years, pulls us away from our human nature sometimes. So one of the themes of the book is human nature, human culture, and the other theme, you might call it anthropomorphism. The things that you need to know before I start reading: the fox is mute, and so that's why he makes a very odd sound. I describe it in the book as sounding like the last gasp of a dying duck. It's a mechanical sound. He has no vocal cords. And then there's two characters that I'll mention in this reading, and their names are Torntail and Tennis Ball, and they're magpies. Okie dokie. Thanks for your patience. Fox had just caught a rabbit, but dropped it as soon as he saw me dancing across the pasture in my cactus-crushing wellies. I had my eyes uphill on the hound across the gravel road. Maybe it was on a leash, or lazy, or mired in quicksand, but that dog never moved from its one spot, a half-mile away and an unimpeded line of sound and sight to my front door. I sang over Fox's head, Elvis's song about a hound who can't catch a rabbit. Fox pranced a horseshoe pattern back and forth in front of me. Ignoring Fox, I jumped right into the third iteration of my musical complaint, reminding the hound dog that he had never caught a rabbit and would never be a friend of mine. Fox did not like being ignored. He snatched up his rabbit, squeezing it in the middle and leaving it sagging from either side of his jaw. It looked like the toothpaste tube my fist wrapped around that very morning. Bending down until my face was an arm's length from his, I placed a hand on each knee. Fox leaned in. That rascal with the slobbery fleas, I whispered, pulling the skin on either side of my mouth and shaking my head to imitate hound fleas. He'll never catch a rabbit. Fox dropped his rabbit and said, "Gaw." Standing up, I crooned about the dog whining all the time. It was a pitiful rabbit specimen, but I couldn't stop in the middle of the chorus. The sheriff picked up the abandoned dog a few days later. We were not trophy hunters, and I, but we gathered our share of mementos. The Boone and Crockett Club wasn't sending judges over to measure the 4x4 mule deer rack hanging above the sofa between photographs of a Grand Teton moose exiting a foggy pond and animal pictographs carved into sandstone. I shot that mule deer in the dawn, following a full moon. The night before, I tromped 4 miles along a snow-packed ranch road, listening to my footsteps, scouting for hoof prints, watching a bright orange dome fill the horizon in front of me. The entire horizon, right to left, nothing but moonrise. I could feel Earth's round ball melded under my mucklocks. Of course, a full moon seen along the horizon is the same size as every other moon, so say physicists. The size of the moon glowing before me was an illusion, magic. My mind playing a trick on me. Here's what I learned from that trick. When you're walking alone on the prairie, and unless you're a physicist, how the moon feels, looks, and acts is more important than its approximate size. I sliced the buck from sternum to pelvis, yanking out the lungs with 2 bare hands. Pulling the legs, I tilted the 200-pound body. Cavity blood and wiggly, pungent gut spilled into the snow. I set the heart aside. It had one neat hole right through the middle. My beautiful rifle, my .6, had done that at 200 meters offhand with snow covering every scraggly knee-high rabbit brush on the mesa and a golden eagle passing overhead. Next morning, carrying a buck propped up in the passenger seat and a headless doe in the back, the Volvo sputtered down a gravel road to a mom-and-pop butchery. Feather-shaped Lombardy poplars, too tall for their width, lined the drive to the house. Of all trees, I most distrust Lombardies. Pop was waiting outside in dark green overalls. After throwing a padded cloth over the buck's head to protect the antlers, he hugged it under the front arms. Distracted by the naked and punky bark trees and searching out an escape route should they succumb to their natural inclination and topple over, I ignored Pop's mutterings. By the time I got over to the buck, it was on a wheeled cart. Pop had his hand looped around one of the buck's legs, and he was tapping the hoof with a finger. He was pissed. The buck should have had a carcass tag tied around its leg. It didn't. I pleaded. Pop sucked in his lips, holding up one hand to stop his son from opening the shop door. He disappeared while I was tearing the car apart like a border guard stopping a van on the Canadian crossing. When Fox scored his big trophy, I saved only 2 feathers. The first thing I recall about that day was watching him through my spotting scope. He was at the far edge of the alfalfa field, a good quarter mile away. Low cloud cover kept the sun from his eyes as he ran a beeline to my cottage without stopping to set down, nibble, or adjust his precious cargo. All the while, he was hustling at a speed that kept me from identifying his prize. He stopped 2 meters away from me, a meadowlark's entwined legs dangling from his jaw. He dropped the lark, walked right past it, and sat as I turned to face him. Well, no one likes a dramatic fox, but I had expected a little more animation for such a huge milestone. It's a miracle, I told him, then louder with arms raised and fists clenched in the victory salute. A miracle, I repeated. Fox was talented, but he couldn't fly. I had never thought he could take down a robin-sized bird. The spring bluebird carnage that I had once accused him of perpetrating had turned out to be the work of kestrels, North America's smallest falcons. At one time, kestrels were hardworking, respectable raptors who earned their living killing insects and hunting Tweety birds. When the valley people lined the roadways with bluebird nest boxes, kestrels went on the dole. Now they eat subsidized bluebirds morning, noon, and night. Tennis ball and torntail swooped in and began tearing at Fox's unguarded kill. The twiggy legs and curled knuckles of the abandoned lark reached skyward. I jumped into the fray when more magpies arrived. As is the case with all animals we dislike, there were too many of them, thousands probably. The magpies swirled around me in tightening circles, leaving me in a vortex of yellow feathers. Fox ignored the pilfering magpies in my energetic attempts to scare them off. The magpies retreated to the blue roof and lined out, hanging their long toes over the edge and tipping towards me. Okie dokie. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, all 3 of you. Those were really beautiful readings. Annie and Keema, if you want to turn your videos on, I'd like to kind of begin the conversation with a question about the wild or nature, how it shows up in your memoirs. You've each written into the wilderness in very distinct ways and very different ways. And so I'm wondering if you can each answer this question. How has your sense of place informed your writing? How does it inform your writing?
I love that question. Thank you. I grew up in a place that demands your attention. It's just so beautiful and devoid of skyscrapers, which is what compels millions of tourists to visit Alaska every year. Everything is water or mountain or creature, and the towns are small and tight-knit. much like rural communities everywhere, except that they were waterbound. So you could get in and out by ferry or plane. And that means that the people who live there by choice. It was always a matter for me that I always wanted to keep in mind that I could not write the Alaska story. That story belongs to the Alaskan Native voices. But I wanted to write a story out of Alaska because that's the only place I could center my own childhood story by birth. And even the title Inside Passage wouldn't work if I had set it in New York City or, Texas, because this is where it occurred. We also moved constantly in my young childhood. So by the time I was 8, I'd lived in like 8 different towns. One year, I attended 4 different schools in 3 different towns. So something that really drew my curiosity was how to write a very clear through line that made sense of all these like landings and takeoffs and multiple people in multiple different towns without confusing the readers. And I realized one way in was through the in-between places that had also become home. So as much as it was the landscape, it was also the ferries and the tents and the cars, the places that were in transition, the bounces. And that drew a lot of questions from me that I feel like I spent a lot of time with in the story.
Thanks, Annie. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So my book takes place in both in Montana and everywhere from the Upper Missouri River breaks to Phillipsburg to a number of the sections take place in Yellowstone. And then the second half of my book takes place in Joshua Tree, the Joshua Tree area in California. It's the high desert. And, I think the book centers around animal appearances in my life during a specific time of grief and transformation. And so place factors in the sense that many of the animal appearances happened in the wild. A moose encounter, owl encounters, a number of snake down here in the desert. And so it feels like, they're more part of the landscape than I am, and that they're speaking from the landscape. They're speaking from kind of the unseen world as well. And so as I begin to craft the book, I was aware of how my inner landscape was being reflected in the outer landscape. And I was really trying to merge those two things in my writing. The desert is a place where there's no future, there's no past. It's very much a place of the present. You look outside and it looks the same today as it will in 3 months, probably. We don't lose leaves on our trees so much. And there was something that I needed at the time of writing my book that was about being in the present, because I think grief is very much a place where a time in your life when you need to be very grounded in the future and the past are sort of elusive. And the desert is also a place that feels like a sort of a blank canvas. The animals and plants that do come up seem to, be very important. To me, they felt like messengers because they were sort of coming out of this void almost, coming in to speak to me, whether it felt like a visitation or just a message that there is new life being born. And yeah, so this sense of the wild is a huge part of my book. And there are many photographs in the book of all the animals. And I really was working to capture the sense of the sacred in the wild, the sacred in these animal encounters through the photography. And the way that the photos were edited was really working to not just document something, but to really speak to this sort of essence that our natural world, the wild world, is a sacred and very resonant place where we can really have very deep, profound experiences.
Kathy, what about you? What's your
Thanks. So place, of course, is important to all of us. And my sense of place is very much involved with nature. And I know that all authors, everything they write, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, place, everybody has to take place into account because we are writing from scenes and scenery, but some folks focus more perhaps on the human world, the contraptions that we've created and maybe the clothes that we wear and the songs that we're singing. And sometimes I read books and I feel like the whole book could have taken place in an elevator, but that doesn't mean I didn't like the book. I'm just seeing that different authors have a different sense of place, which is why you asked the question. And so for my sense of place, it's always the natural world, and that's just automatic for me. I feel that nature is a community, and I'm part of that community because I'm an animal with a capital A. I'm in the animal kingdom. And nature is all the living and the non-living things in the community. And there's so much a part of this book, and several of the judges and the people that have written about the book have mentioned how they've noticed that. And I need them to point that out to me because it's just automatic to me when I get up in the morning and I walk outside and I say, who's up to what? And what trouble have you guys been making overnight? I don't mean, I mean the deer, and I mean the rice grass, and I mean the wheat grass. I mean, everything is a who to me. And that's, I guess, because somebody has to be a who and there's no other who's, but it's just very automatic that I fit myself in nature. And so that place where we are fit and part of this living and non-living world really permeates all of the book. And of the non-living world, I know some of you will have water being very important to you, but my book, I think people will say the clouds were the most important. I mean, this is a high altitude desert, but we have snow, but we don't have a lot of water. I live on a river, that's true. And the river is always in the book, but the clouds are very much a part of the book as well, because they're part of the community. And as far as specific places, of course, besides Montana, I live in the same place where most of you are from, I think, but also Mount Rainier plays a pretty strong role because I was a ranger there for a long time. Mount Rainier is in several of the chapters as well. Otherwise, it's in Montana. And I wanted to say something else about nature being this community that we're part of. And that is that I think that's probably the reason why a lone person, a physically lone person, doesn't feel alone. Because I think some people who are looking for a community, they assume that community needs to be based on human beings. And when those human beings aren't there, they feel like they're missing something and they're alone. But actually, I don't think I've felt that way for decades and decades. And humans are part of the whole living world and the non-living world. We are part of nature, and I don't see how you can feel alone. I know that in COVID, I'm reading about so many people saying loneliness has become an issue. In fact, for me, because my books come out at the same time as COVID, it's less, there's more people in my life than there were before. So COVID's brought more people into my life because it's coming along concomitant with the book. But I don't feel lonely because of the clouds and the grass and that big fly that was on my bathroom wall when I was taking a bath last night. And those are the things that I notice and that I talk to and that I spend a lot of time thinking about what's going on in their mind and empathizing with, it makes me very comfortable and not lonely.
Before I ask another question, Annie or Keema, do you have anything else you want to respond to or add?
Yes, Catherine, I'm struck by your story as a way of sharing your community. And I was curious if you feel like it's brought more humans into your physical community than you expected. I mean, you mentioned the COVID times have meant that you're encountering more people, but do you feel as though you've brought some back with you in some way as they're engaging and interacting with your story and you?
Yes, and one of my students yesterday or the day before, he accused me of being a closet extrovert. So, and I told him I was writing that down. He said, I've always thought that. He said, you when you're with people, you have so much charisma, but then you go and hide in your little corner. And you don't. He said, but I think you're a closet extrovert. So that's interesting comment. And I want to make a comment. So I'm going to be exploring that a little bit more, because writers always think that they're introverts. Annie brought up the subject of sacred, and I don't use that word in my book, but I just thought about it recently because Narrative Magazine asked me what makes a place sacred. And I think that I addressed it without using the word sacred, and Annie addressed it really beautifully also. And I'm just wondering for Keema then, what do you, and so what I said to Narrative, I thought about it because I hadn't thought about it with the book. What makes something sacred to me is that I'm willing to sacrifice for it. I'm willing to give up my time, I'm willing to give my money, and I'm willing to give my life for it. And my land, this land, is sacred to me because it makes me want to sacrifice for it. And the only reason it makes me want to sacrifice is because of the animals that are here. And I said that nature is all the living and the non-living things, but they don't all make it sacred to me. And I suppose it's different for everyone, but for me, it's the foxes and the raccoons and the skunk and the badgers and the deer. It's the animals that I relate to that make me want to sacrifice for the land. I'll open that up to you folks.
I will say that in my current phase of life, my focus is very centered on my children. And it's been really interesting to think about sacred in terms of writing a childhood memoir while raising very small people, particularly in pandemic times where I am everything. I am their whole entire world. I am their play dates. I am their teacher. I am their servant. And and I think constantly about making the choices that celebrate their lives in the best way possible and will help them come through this time into a future where perhaps they'll have a story of their own to tell one day. But I carry that with me every minute of the day. I'm thinking about, for me, the first thought I had when I heard the word sacred was the smell of creosote on a dock. And it permeates almost every like beachfront in Southeast Alaska. It is that and the smell, petrichor, rain on a tree. Smells really summon it for me tremendously, but it's not something I've been able to really share with my kids at an age where they were conscious enough. Before, my son has spent half his life in lockdown, and before that he was so little he doesn't remember a thing. So yeah, it's been on my mind. I really appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, it's a great way. I think it's integral to discussing our relationship with place, whether it's, really overt in our work or whether or not it's very subtle. But I think no matter what, if we're bringing the sense of place to a poetics, the sacred is going to really be named there. But yeah, for me, the sacred has been about communion. It's been about communion moments when I'm communing in sort of a way that is without language, with the animals and plants and insects and all all the beautiful and the spirits. That was certainly, my book is very much about the way that they come through in unexpected ways. And that's when I think my sense of the sacred really started to open up, and I wanted to be able to put words to it afterwards.
That brings me to a question for you, Annie. Actually, as you were reading, I felt again a sense that it was almost as if the animals brought this story to you and said, now it's time.
Yes, you got that right, Keema. The animal, I felt very much like this story was unfolding before me, and that I was just meant to be a witness of it. I can't explain the whole thing more than to say that I felt like it was meant to be that this story was told, and it felt like the animals were sort of almost producing a play or something right before my eyes, and I was just supposed to be taking photos and documenting it. So that felt very sacred and very profound, and I feel very very lucky that the snake ended up on the cover of a book after all, just like maybe it wanted to be.
That reminds me, do all three of us, Catherine, the image of the fox on your book is a watercolor, is that right?
It's not a watercolor, and we hired an artist, and I'm not sure how. It's a very tiny fox, though, but so it's not a photo, but there is a photo of him. Were you going to ask if there's a photo of him? There's a photo of him in the back of the book, the very last page.
I was just thinking about, Annie, that your book cover is an image that you brought to the tale, and mine is also it's some of my mom's more recent digital
awesome.
landscape art that she's been doing, but my daughter picked this one. And then I thought maybe perhaps the fox was something you had brought to your cover. I was thinking how interesting it is to have that.
I sent in a lot
input.
of photos, but not artwork. But yes, I do think in images. So pretty much the book flows from one scene to another. It's mostly images. It's true.
I have a question. So each of your memoirs and I think each of your books is categorized as a memoir, but they're so different, different forms, even different ways to write a memoir. I'm wondering how each of you came not only to memoir as kind of this broad genre, but to your own voice, to your own writing, the way that it's written. Obviously, Annie, yours is I always get it, like I always conflate yours with poetry. It is very lyrical. It's a lyric essay kind of. And so I'm wondering what, not only how you came to memoir, but maybe your relationship to it. Where are your inspirations, and how these three books came to be the way that they are, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. I'll keep mine brief, but actually just was thinking about this the other day because recently was the anniversary of the day that I drove into Missoula to start grad school. I had gotten in my writing sample with an essay about my absent father. And it was, the mystery of him was something I'd been chasing for a long time. And the day I drove in, he died. And so I spent my 2 years here really kind of digging into those questions more than I thought I would be. And by the time I graduated, I had, a collection of essays, and my thesis advisor, Judy Blunt, who I think might be here, thank you. She was like, if you don't write this story, if you know Judy, if you don't write this story. And I hadn't planned on writing this particular book at the time. So I was like, oh gosh, I guess that's a thing I need to do. And so I first thought I was going to write a collection of like quirky, fun essays about, our adventurous life all over Alaska. And I realized that I couldn't do that. It's, I couldn't leave out some of the harder parts of my story and still make sense on the page, even as a child narrator. So, and then I had to, shape in a more traditional narrative arc, think about the pieces as a more cohesive whole. And one of the things that pushed me to make it happen were that growing up bookish in Southeast Alaska is awesome if you are trying to hide from the rain. It's great. I read a lot of books from the library and I loved that space more than almost anywhere else, but I could not connect with the kids that appeared in any of the stories that I read. I was like, who are these people? They have like sports arenas and like malls. We have, like not even enough roadway to get up over 45 miles an hour and folk festivals. And I really pined for stories about like a regular kid like me who lived in a wild northern rural place. And I kept looking and didn't find them. So eventually I brought myself to that story thinking that, it could be amazing to have more northern voices take some space in the world.
Yeah, I didn't think of I wasn't thinking of my book as a memoir. I didn't really think of it as a memoir until we chose that for the subtitle. When we, were working when I was working with the publisher. And it is a memoir in the sense that it's nonfiction and it takes place during a certain period of time that is now the past. But I saw it more, as I said earlier, that I was witnessing these very profound animal appearances during this specific time in my life. But in terms of memoirs that have influenced me and that helped, I think, shape my voice and my approach to memoir would be M Train by Patti Smith and With the Woman Warrior by Maxine Hung Kingston. Both of those books are nonlinear. Both of them have elements of dream and fantasy in them. They both definitely operate in liminal spaces. And I think both of those books gave me the courage to go in that direction and to be playful with my approach to nonfiction and to really just let my voice come through in the most sort of raw, authentic way that as it was. And I come from a theater background, so I do believe that my voice in writing is sort of driven by a lot of experience, speaking words that are meant to be spoken on a stage and in that kind of form. And that may be why my writing has a more poetic tone. And also much of it is addressed to the animals. As the piece I just read, it was addressed to wolf, and there are other pieces where I'm addressing it directly to animals. And that kind of intimacy was something that, I felt very in tune with sort of the tone, the world that I was creating and living in at the time.
Well, I'm really glad to hear you say that you didn't know you were writing a memoir because, and of course, I didn't either. And I thought that I was writing a story about Fox. And he was just that important to me. And I felt that I owed it to him. And I also felt that that's what he wanted. A lot of humans want to leave a legacy. That I think that's genetic. And we are almost identical genetically to so many other animals in the animal kingdom. So I do think it's true that humans aren't the only animals that have a desire to leave a legacy. I happen not to have had a desire to leave a legacy, but I think Fox did. I think he really wanted to matter. That's why he dogged me and followed me around and decided that I was going to be his friend. And the night that he brought his 4 kits by for me to babysit while he just sat there, it was in the moonlight. And I realized how much he trusted me. This was into our second year together then, the amount of trust that he felt for me. And when I came in that night from walking him up to his den in the full moon, realizing how much joy that he had given me, and I thought about it. And love is such a hokey word, and I don't use it in the book, of course, but when someone trusts you that much and brings you that much joy, I think that's a pretty good definition of love. And I see things with pictures in my mind as images. And so I will always have that image in my mind of those little kits bobbing up and down, their little heads coming just above the grass in the moonlight. That's my picture of love. And when I came in finally that night, I just swept the pages off this big desk that's next to me. I was working on a textbook for middle graders. And I just went, and that's the end of that textbook. And I realized I would have to write Fox's story, and how it evolved from being his story, which would be straight nonfiction, to a memoir first is because of D. McNamara. So I'm a Grizz, you know that, and it's amazing how much the University of Montana, although I didn't get my doctorate there, has played in my life. And the weird thing is, I sent D. McNamara, I emailed her the first chapter of the book, and I said, this is my nonfiction story about, and she said, well, of course this is a memoir. And I said, no, actually it's not a memoir. And she said, it is a memoir because it's first person and it's true. And so now you have to go back and think about putting more of yourself in the story instead of making it was really encyclopedic, the way a professor would write not scientific so much, but really just encyclopedic about the fox. It wasn't a memoir then. And I think the real big difference between nonfiction, and I don't read a lot of nonfiction, I read science and I read creative nonfiction, memoir, and fiction, and straight science. So I don't read the stuff in the middle, the journalistic kind of science. The difference between the nonfiction and the journalistic kind and memoir, which is what we three gals have written, I think is emotional honesty. You instead of just being objective and giving us facts and information and data, even though some of it's titillating and it's creative and it's funny sometimes, that still doesn't make it memoir. It has to have your emotional honesty, Annie's and Keema's and mine. We have to put that on the page. And once I realized that, it was easy to do, because that was why I was writing it, because of my emotions towards the fox. And then I just pulled out those emotional scenes that were so important to me. And all of my really big, important emotions are always associated with a picture. So I know exactly what I was seeing when I felt those things. And that's how it came about being a memoir. So I have D. McNamara to thank for. So Annie, if you had sent it, if you had gone to the University of Montana, somebody would have told you before the last minute that you also were writing a memoir.
So I'm gonna just wrap this up for a second. We all three did not know we were writing memoir. And here we are on this debut panel. What an honor to be with you. And Annie also has a relationship with Pragita. So we have three creative writing faculty, past, presents, to thank for our moment here, our opportunity to shine together. That's kind of amazing. Yeah.
I think that's a really wonderful and beautiful note to end on. We've hit the hour mark, but I do want to make sure that the three of you have spoken to what you want to speak to. So if you have any more questions for one another, or any questions, I don't see any questions from the audience, but audience, if you do have questions for Catherine, Keema, or Annie, please feel free to throw them in the Q&A now. But yeah, do the three of you have any more questions? Just want to make sure we're covering everything.
I feel good. This has been a lot of fun.
It's been a lot of
Yeah,
fun.
it really has. It really has. What an honor to be with all of you, and thank you so much, Lauren.
Oh, and thank you guys so much for being here. Wonderful memoirs, all three of them, so beautifully written and rendered. Thank you, Keema, Annie, and Catherine today. And thank you, audience, for your attention. And I want to thank again our event sponsors, Arts Missoula, MissoulaEvents.net, the Whitefish Review, Humanities Montana, the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, and Noteworthy Paper and Press. I have been throwing links to these memoirs in the chat. So just as a reminder, you can purchase these wonderfully wild memoirs at Fact and Fiction Books. You can buy them online at factandfictionbooks.com, or you can actually go into the brick and mortar store and purchase them there. And we would love it. The book festival would love it if you use the MBF code at checkout in both online and in store, so that 20% of sales come back to us.
Wow.
So yeah, we can't thank them enough for that. So again, thank you to the three of you for writing these books and for being here with us today.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.